Hello and welcome to Session 5 of the podcast for Night of the Sun, a D&D 5e module that I'm assuming you have if you're here at all. My name is the Mad Hermit. I'm going to be the one leading you through this little session. This is a podcast designed for dungeon masters running Night of the Sun so that I can give some advice on running it, talk through the module with them, see if I can't clear up any problems with it. Hopefully I can. So, as always, let's start with a few little recaps from the last session, things I'd like to change. First thing that came up, re-listening to that, well, very first thing, I should say, is that you may have noticed there are some audio, what would we call them? This is our first podcast, so we are working on sorting out the audio for these and working on the recordings. We are not real good at it yet, as you may or may not have noticed from the sound quality. Some of these they're going to vary, session to session. So give us a little bit of a break if you can. We're learning our way through it, and I'm assuming by the end of this we will have it down to some degree or other. But as it stands, we are still kind of stumbling our way along. Okay, that aside, from Session 4, I forgot to mention that when your PCs initially meet Mayor Lenny Tilston, I think I've called him like 6 different things throughout this podcast, so his official name is Tilston. I actually called him Lily Tilston a little while ago. I don't know what I was thinking of that. Had to erase it. Anyway, Mayor Lenny Tilston is the correct way to pronounce his name. When your party first encounters him, and he initially asks them, "Are you the help I sent for?" In one of the playtests I ran of this game, the party answered, "Yes, of course we're the aid you sent away for," even though they weren't. And then from there, he was very excited to see them and went on to describe his litany of woes. They just pretended that they hadn't seen the letters he had sent. That may happen in your case too, if you have an evil party or just some clever players. Now, if the whole entire village wasn't going to be entirely closed off by morning from the outside, I would of course bring in an actual party of NPCs that are the help sent to the mayor. But that, even if help was sent, and that's not the hook you're using for your PCs, that help isn't going to arrive by mornings, and by then it'll be too late for the help to make any difference if they do show up. So if they lie, that's good. Just roll with that. That can help. That can even be a little bit helpful to your situation. Okay, one of the other things I wanted to discuss is that just wanted to be clear that the villagers do not know that Silas is a were-rat. Now remember, they don't even know his name because they can't really get him to make much sense when they're talking to him, but they don't suspect him of being a were-rat. That just hasn't come up. The village itself has seen a bit of an incursion of were-rats, I guess we would call it. A lot more, not were-rats, of rats. There's a lot more rats around the village than there normally would. The village has noticed this, but they have in no way tied this to Silas. They don't suspect him of being a were-rat or anything like that. Now, when Silas actually escapes from the jail cell in the constable's house, in the basement of the constable's house, he's going to just, change form into a giant rat, which is a giant rat, but it's still small enough to squeeze through the bars of the cage cell, and then change into his more monstrous form and kill the constable and the constable's helper. So if your party has, by the next morning, if they have already gone to the constable's house and examined that, they're going to not see any signs of how Silas got out of the cage exactly. The constable and the halfling will be, their bodies are there, they're dead, and there's blood everywhere, but there's the cell doors to all of those jail cells, they're all closed and locked still. And as a matter of fact, Silas will have left the keys untouched on the constable's belt. So I think that pretty much catches us up to the point we should be, where is your PCs have gone to bed either at their relative's house, if you're playing through the relative's hook, or in the inn. They're woken the next morning by the sound of frantically ringing church bells from the church, from the chapel across the creek from the inn. If they are at the relative's house, they will also be awoken by this sound, and their relative will be up, saying, "Oh my gosh, what's going on? Why are they ringing that bell?" Players, if they're in the inn, they open, move the curtains from the window. They're mostly going to be greeted with a very smeary window. It's raining heavily outside, and it's still very dark outside. So other than seeing a torch sort of bobbing along toward the middle of the village, they're not going to be able to make out very clearly what's going on in the village unless they open the window specifically. They may not think to. I ran in the playtest I did. No one thought to open that window. It doesn't really matter. But if they do open it, they'll be able to catch a slightly clearer view of the fact that there is something that has grown up over the hills surrounding the village. It's off from the village about maybe 100 yards or 200 yards back from the village is where it has stopped, but it has swept past the village. So over the surrounding hills, they're going to see what looks like a really dense cloud, maybe of a dark, thick fog. They won't be able to really be able to tell. Maybe it's plants of some sort, but if so, it's an incredible growth of them, about 30 or 40 feet of plants grown up over that hillside. They will still be able to see the torch. That is Acolyte Theta. They won't know that, but that's one of the acolytes from the church down toward the center of the village, trying to gather the elderly in the village, the children, women, that sort of thing, and directing them to go to the chapel where they can be safe until she has figured out what exactly is going on, what's caused this growth around the village. Now, a lot of people are milling around her, and a lot more people are kind of, coming out of their homes, just dressing. They've been woke up by the bell as well, and some of them are heading towards the church, some are heading toward the tavern. So your players, if they're already in the inn, they'll probably hastily get dressed and make their way downstairs, where there should already be a gathering of some people, a dozen or so people in the downstairs of the inn. The mayor, Lenny Tilston, isn't there. Just these people that have gathered in Mindra serving drinks, and the cook is there already working. They're handing out food and drinks to people. They don't even seem to be charging for it. The people are gathered just in little knots around the tavern area. Some of them arguing. Some of them have children, sleepy children on their laps, things like that. So as your players come down into this gathering of people, they are, of course, going to draw the attention of everyone in here. And as these are now fairly nervous people, it's not like they're just going to be allowed to come down the stairs and walk in without everyone taking notice of them. They're once again going to be greeted by an awkward silence that may be broken by someone, asking who the hell they are, or where did you come from, or did you do this? Did you cause those thorns to grow up around the village? Something like that. Basically, some tense questions going to be fired off at the party after a moment of awkward silence. And go ahead and let your party interact with that for a second. But before it gets heated or anything gets kind of out of hand, make sure that the mayor comes kind of smashing in through the back door there, taking off his wet cloak and hanging it up. If the party and the mayor discovered that Silas had escaped the night before, then the mayor may already have helped, asked them to help him find Silas in the morning. If they didn't go explore the constable's house, then the mayor is going to start to give some announcements here, and this is going to be the chance for the characters to learn that the man who was scheduled to be executed that morning has escaped. We give in the module a series of sort of the steps through which the announcements should go, and kind of like the conversation with Lenny the night before, this isn't meant to be just a straight info dump. It's more like a role-playing session. We kind of give some interjections that the crowd might have. One of the things that you kind of want to get across is the fact that these villagers are already upset. They have no problem shouting at their mayor. Their emotions are going to be worn on their sleeves. So, when he says that that the Madman has escaped, the crowd's going to be visibly upset by that. Some of them are going to yell at him about that he should have allowed them to kill him the day they caught him, things like that. Now, right after the announcement about the fact that the Madman has escaped and is probably somewhere large in the village, someone is going to yell, we should all go to the tower, referring to the Brewers Tower just to the southeast of town. And the mayor then is going to make a fairly important announcement, just something for you want the players to know, is that the dwarves and the halflings have already all gathered in the Brewers Tower, and they have closed the doors, and they're not allowing anyone else in. So the mayor's going to announce that, which is going to infuriate the villagers even more. They're going to start cussing the dwarves and talking about the dark nature of hill dwarves and, all the stuff that they will. And the important thing here is that the players get this information, because honestly, given the course of events, what's going to take place here in the next, 78 hours or so in the village, it probably the best place for the villagers would be that tower. It's the most defensible location. So, if you're playing a party that's hailing from the good side of the coin, they may take it upon themselves to go up to that tower, knock at the door, and try to negotiate with the dwarves for, access, at least allowing some of the people to take shelter in the tower. Maybe the weakest or most vulnerable of the villagers. That kind of population is who you primarily want in there, though, the tower isn't gigantic, but it's big enough to house probably most of the village without too much trouble, and defend them fairly well if you could get them in there. The dwarves are not happy about the idea of that. They have all their brewing equipment in there, all their beer. The fact that they have so much beer there is going to be one of the things that upsets the villagers, but the primary thing you want your PCs to take away from that conversation is the fact that the tower has been closed off. Now, once the mayor gets through with his announcements to the villagers, he's going to tell them all to, stay calm. He wants them moving around the village in groups rather than alone. And he invites them all to have some breakfast, have a drink, have a beer or two, and try to relax. And then he's going to make his way through the crowd. People are going to be coming up and bugging him, accosting him a little bit, a couple of them yelling at him. He'll just sort of deftly move his way through that crowd and approach the PCs, asking them if they could meet with him in the private dining room to discuss some things. And then he will take them in there to talk to them. Once he gets into the private dining room, his main concern is just going to ask the party if they have any idea what could have caused the Thornwall around the village. And if the players don't know about it, then he will try to describe it as best he can. He's going to say it's 35, 40 foot tall wall of thorns that seems to have just grown up all around the village. It hasn't grown into the village, it's just grown around the village. And he has no idea where it could have come from or how it could have happened. There doesn't seem to be a way through the thorns. You could try to, he'll explain that some people tried to hack into them a little bit, but it's a lot of work to move even just a little ways into the thorn wall. There's a few things you're going to have to decide about that thorn wall, but we'll cover it here in a second after we go over all this. The next thing he's going to do is he's going to ask the PCs if they didn't find out about Silas escaping, the Madman escaping the night before. He's going to ask them if they can please try to hunt him down in the village that morning. He says they can capture the Madman or kill him. Either way is fine with the mayor. He just wants to know that problem has been taken care of, so that's one less thing he has to worry about. He's not scared of the Madman killing any of the villagers as they wander around the village. He's also going to ask them if they could go out and find Acolyte Theta, who he says he saw walking with a torch toward the center of the village earlier. He couldn't reach her. He just wants to know if the PCs would take it upon, do him a favor, go find her and inform her the fact that the Madman has escaped and killed the constable and the constable's helper, because he figures she needs to take that into account while she's trying to help the people that she's trying to help. This whole kind of interaction should also be a role-playing session. It doesn't necessarily just need to be the mayor, verbatim saying things to the party. It more or less needs to be an interactive kind of session. If the party has any questions for the mayor, you're going to want him to answer them. And when you're about to close it off, you just kind of want the mayor to tell the party to go get some breakfast, maybe grab a beer or something, and then to head out and find Theta as soon as they can and start looking for the Madman. So that should wrap that up and allow your parties to kind of shift toward getting out into the village itself. They may or may not stop and eat, in which case you might want to talk to some of the villagers. The villagers have also seen the Thornwall. As DM, you're going to have to decide whether your Thornwall is the kind that has poisoned thorns on it or not. If it does have poisoned thorns, then hitting the Thornwall or like brushing against it, anytime a character is poked by one of these thorns, they're going to get sort of a big swollen welt where they poked against it. It doesn't cause more damage, but that welt will last until the characters take their next sort of full or long rest, and it can limit movement. So if you decide to make it poisoned and the players, say, get their hands poked by the thorns in some way, that's going to make it, the hands are going to swell up, and it's going to make it difficult to hold their weapons. It's going to make it far more difficult to use like their thieves' tools or to cast spells. So you want to keep that in mind. If you go with having the poisoned thorns, that's going to affect things. Likewise, there are some thorn blights that are going to show up, the little living thorn critters that are going to come up that the players may have to fight with. And if you've decided to make these thorns poisoned, those blights are likewise going to be poisoned. Again, it doesn't add much damage, it just complicates things by way of those wounds that they receive, causing these kind of big swells to happen. And those only last until rest. They'll go away after the rest, but every time they get them, their hands, their arms, their feet, legs, that sort of thing, going to get swollen, and it's going to complicate how they interact. Now, it may come up in the course of the conversation with the mayor in the private room. He has seen the Thornwall up close, and he spoke with a couple of halflings that told him, at least, that they had ran the entire length of it all the way around the village. Those halflings won't have mentioned to the mayor that the thorns kind of grew up and over the crick. That won't come up as an issue in this conversation, but they will know it completely surrounds the village. Once the players go outside and they can see this massive growth for themselves, I mean, it's just obvious. It isn't very far off to the, I guess it's the west of the inn. It goes up along the hills. It's about maybe 50 yards off from any buildings on the edges of the village itself. It just kind of makes the whole village look like it's sunken into these thorns, like a crater or something. If they go up close to the thorn wall to examine it themselves, they'll see that it's, kind of a darker green toward the top where most of the foliage of the thorn wall is, but underneath that, it's just the tangled vines of the thorns. Some of them might be 2 inches, 2.5 inches thick toward the bottom. They get smaller as they go up, but it's just kind of thickly tangled there. We give rules for if your players decide they want to try to hack their way into it. It's possible. They'll just wear out fairly soon. You won't get very far, probably, 50, no, not even that, 30 yards before a PC would be pretty haggard, starting to suffer fatigue from hacking their way through it. Also, there's a small chance while hacking their way through it that they're going to be poked by the thorns as they go along. None of the pokes should produce very much damage, unless the thorn vines are poisoned. In general, I would let the thorns do like a point of damage for every, say, 6 pokes that a character receives from them, just in case, if somebody gets thrown into the thorns or something like that. But if they're poisoned, you could reduce that by half. Say they take a point of damage for every 3 pokes that are suffered from the thorn wall. Now, it's possible your PCs didn't even look out the window. One of my playtest groups didn't. They won't have even, guessed at this. They'll have heard about the thorns from possibly the people downstairs talking about the thorn wall. So they may get their first glance of it when they leave the inn that morning. And if they didn't look out the window, they won't have seen Acolyte Theta with her torch moving toward the center of town. Now, the mayor may have seen this, may have mentioned it to them, but if they're not sure where to locate Theta, or they can't see her at the time that they come out of the inn, they may go to the chapel first, which is a good chance to get to describe the chapel and the interior of it. If they go there that morning, there's already going to be a few children, a couple of old couples, and some, old widows and widowers already in the inn, not in the inn, in the chapel, already kind of, milling around, being fed by one of the acolytes there. The bell will have stopped being rung about halfway through the players talking with the mayor in the private room, if they're there. If they've started from a relative's house, that bell will continue till about the time they probably reach the inn originally, then it'll finally stop ringing at that point. If the players left the relative's house, they will have found Theta in the village probably before they've even reached the inn, in which case you may end up running a conversation with her there. If the players know about the Madman escaping and the death of the constables, they may inform her at that time. And if they've listened to the litany of woes from the mayor the night before or heard it from the relative, they may have some questions for Theta anyway, specifically why she covered up all the sigils and wouldn't why she got rid of all the signs, and if she has any more knowledge about them. She will have seen them pretty clearly before they were cleaned up. It's possible they may ask her about the tomb. Now, we'll discuss a little more about the tomb here in a bit, but I'm just saying you can go over that most of Theta's conversation can be handled if they encounter her first before they go to the inn. That's fine. Just don't want to make it real long. And you may want to skip the part where Niles comes and interrupts it until the players have been to the inn. You can run this, that way if you'd like. That way they can leave the inn later, go looking for Theta again, and then have that scene play out. Or you can just have that scene play out, at which point Niles will be desperately trying to drag Theta back to the chapel. You need to read through this section of the book, get an idea of the events that are happening, and especially if you're going with a hook where the players aren't starting in the inn, then you're going to have to juggle these events around a little bit, just however you think works best for your game. Once Niles drags Theta back to the chapel, he's trying to show her the open grave, Father Chandley's open grave in the graveyard behind the chapel. This is indicating that Father Chandley has, not only has the Thornwall surrounded the village, but Father Chandley has clawed his way out of his grave. And this should shock both Theta and Niles. Niles obviously will have been shocked by it first because he will have seen it first. And at this point, Theta is going to, kind of demand that the PCs help her find Father Chandley in the village. She doesn't want him killed. She wants the PCs to capture him and bring him back to the chapel so that she can perform a quote-unquote exorcism on Father Chandley to save him from whatever has possessed him. Now, if you have any priests in your party or a paladin, something like that, just a great time for a very simple arcana check, say, 10, or even a religion check, DC 10, something like that, where they'll know that there's no exorcism that can be done on the undead to save them, but Acolyte Theta doesn't know that, and she doesn't want to believe that. She thinks that she can save her mentor, Father Chandley, and she's going to pretty much demand that the PCs bring him back to her alive. If the PCs end up leaving the inn in search of Theta, then they're going to go to the chapel first, where they'll, see what I was describing. It gives you a chance to describe the elements in the church, and one of the important elements in the church, there's two, is the archaic helmet, horse barding helmet that's hung on the altar itself, like up at the podium in the front of the chapel area. And the most other important thing would be a tapestry that's hung in the church depicting Bone Dust Hill and some knights around it, lots of bodies laid out around the hill, and sort of knights and priests in a procession carrying the bodies up to the top of that hill, where a priest is kneeling, reaching down to touch his hand to the ground as if, blessing the top of the hill, or, he's just touching the ground of the shrine, something like that. In the background of that entire tapestry is an image of the sun rising in the distance. So that's an important element to mix in there. This rising sun element is in the stained windows. It's kind of all over. And these things are giving oblique hints toward the fact that, A, there's a tomb under the shrine. Tapestry doesn't show the tomb, the opening to the tomb or anything like that. But why else would they be carrying bodies up to the top of that hill? And the fact that the priest is kneeling, touching his hand to the ground is indicating how you open the tomb, and the only time you can open it is at sunrise. So you're going to want to describe the tapestry, and you're going to want to describe that barding piece, the helmet, the horse helmet that's hung on the podium of the chapel, or the up where the preacher would stand to speak to people. This barding-helm, I don't know exactly not sure what the technical term for a barding-helm is, but we're going to just call it a barding-helm. You don't want to describe it fairly clearly to your PCs, because there's a sunstone, which is sort of an orange gem, a large one, held in place at the forehead of this helmet. This is the kind of helmet you would put on the face of a horse, a war horse that's going into combat. And so the sunstone is there. It's bright orange color, and you want to describe it to the players, because later in the adventure, in order to get into the final tomb where the Knight of the Sun's body is kept safe, they're going to have to be able to go through a secret door, and one of the keys to entering that secret door is remembering that there's a sunstone set into the forehead of this barding-helm. These clues need to be kind of delivered, and if your PCs happen to get to the chapel that morning, you'll want to make sure you get that all across to them pretty clearly. Once they're there, they'll find out Theta's out in the village, so then they'll have to go out in the village to find her. Whether they're coming from their relative's house or from the inn, you're going to want the PCs to encounter Theta out and about in the village, and have their conversation with her. She'll be curt. she won't exactly be rude, but she definitely will not stop what she's doing. She's going to keep marching along, and she may direct some of the party members to, to aid her in whatever way. If she needs an elderly woman to get some help to the chapel, she's going to not even insist, just sort of command one of the PCs to do that. Now remember, the acolytes do not, they don't talk about the tomb under the shrine outside of town, but neither are they really in the habit of lying about it. If someone brings it up to them, they will discuss it. And one of the things that Theta is quite proud of is the fact that she now is the bearer of the secret of how to enter that tomb. Of course, she will not give that to the PCs. If they ask about the tomb, she may inform them that there is a secret of how it's entered and that she has that secret. It was given to her by Father Chandley the night before he died. Perhaps he had a premonition of his own death or something, but he let her know about it. And that, no, she won't tell them how it's done. And she'll just kind of leave the conversation at that. One way or another, how that conversation rolls out, it should end with Acolyte Niles, who's just sort of this plump, young monk who will come, slipping through the mud toward Theta, begging her to return to the chapel, grabbing her by the hand and basically dragging her back toward the chapel so that he can show her the open grave that he's discovered in the graveyard behind the church. With any luck, your PCs will go along with these two acolytes back to the church so that they also can see the opened grave. There's some handprints in the mud, so anybody kind of searching around there will be able to see the signs of Father Chandley having clawed his way out of the tomb. And it'll be at that point that Theta asks them to help her capture Father Chandley, to not hurt him, to just capture him, to bring, at all costs, not to harm him, but to bring him back to the chapel so that she can perform an exorcism. She's going to go into the chapel and prepare the space for that exorcism. And it should be at about this time, somewhere around there, that we hear a blood-curdling scream down toward the center of the village. And this is where things are going to finally kind of just kick into high gear. So it's at the point where once you've gotten them to the point that we have this scream, that they've kind of learned all the elements at play. We have the missing Madman, who is somewhere in the village, presumably. We have Father Chandley having clawed his way out of his grave. And we have, Acolyte Theta demanding that he be brought back to her alive. And then we'll have this scream, and here we're going to find Father Chandley, because Father Chandley is now Ghast, and he is running through the village amok and looking for victims, and he's found one down by the center bridge, sort of between the center bridge and the mill on the north side of the bridge is where all the activity's going on. By this point, it's not completely dark out anymore. The sun has risen somewhere, but it's all dark clouds, so it's light-ish, very gray out, and the PCs should be able to make out a mass of people down there toward the center of the village, some of them screaming and running toward the chapel, some fleeing toward the inn and tavern, others sort of watching in shocked fascination from that center bridge, something that's taking place toward the mill. So at this point, your PCs, hopefully this will be the catalyst to get them moving in that direction. Running in the village in the mud and rain should be difficult. We advise dexterity checks, I think, every 100 yards or so that the characters are running. And if one of the players fails that check, just have them roll a D100 to see about how many yards they got along that run before they fell in the mud. And keep a little bit of track of this, because every time they hit the mud, they're going to get caked and covered with mud. And if they've done this 2 or 3 times, they're going to just be pitiful with mud. I mean, they're just going to have it in their boots and in their shirts, and just their clothing is just going to be caked with mud. This could complicate their dealing with their weapons, with fighting. Trying to shoot an arrow when your gloves are coked with, completely caked with thick mud is not going to work. They're going to have to just hurl a glove into the mud and try to do it with their hands, that sort of thing. Speaking of gloves, I don't know if I mentioned, if your characters are, wearing gloves and good armor, heavy cloaks, they'll be more protected from the thorns. So the pokes should be a little more rare for them, should they land in the thorns at any point, and that could come up. Anyway, once the party arrives down toward the center of the village, they should get their first view of Father Chandley, who, by the time they arrive at the center bridge, will have slain the woman that he had grabbed and kind of rolled down the hillside with into the creek. as the party is approaching, he will leap off of that body and take off up the crick running. And this is your point where you get to display his speed, because unlike a normal ghast that has a movement of maybe 30, 35, something like that, this ghast has risen from the dead with that rabbit's foot charm in his stomach, so he is moving at 50 feet per round, which is, a lot faster than your average ghast. He's really flying up that crick, just, spraying water around himself as he goes lunging up the crick toward the most northern bridge. And as he passes under that northern bridge, that's where Silas is hiding. Silas, the were-rat, the madman, is hiding under that bridge, and he has with him one of his tricks. Many of his tricks are hidden around the village in various outhouses. Every time he's near an outhouse, you can roll a d6, and if it comes up with a 5 or 6, then you can assume that he has one of his tricks stashed in that outhouse. If he wants it, he can go in, spend a few rounds digging that trick out, and then you just roll on the chart or pick the trick that he has that he might take with him to use against the party or the other, villagers, that sort of thing. He's probably at this point disguised in an old cloak, so that if he's just moving out amongst people, he'll kind of hunch over and act like an old person walking along. He might even be carrying a stick to kind of help him. It isn't like a foolproof disguise, but it's enough of a disguise that at a distance it might be hard to see him. Anyway, it's going to get a lot harder to see him because he's uncorking this thing called a bottle of vast vapors. This is a bottle that contains basically a fog storm within it. And after he uncorks it, it just begins to plume out a thick fog. And this thing will spread swiftly from the point of the bottle. And it's going to spread out at about, I don't know if it's 10 or 20 yards per round, very thickly, just roiling out from underneath that bridge. And it's going to continue to roil out until it is basically enveloped the entire crater in the thorns where the village is. So the entire village is going to get covered by this mass of fog, and it would last an awfully long time, except for the fact that it's raining. It's not very windy, but it's definitely raining hard. So that rain is going to thin this fog out. I think at its worst, it's going to be about 50 feet be the visibility limits. Once it has covered the entire village, it'll start to thin even a little more, and then over the hours, that will become less and less. If the PCs have some ability to move a vast amount of wind, then they can do that and kind of maybe clear up some areas a little bit. But generally, there's enough fog here that's going to be around for several hours. Granted, it thins quickly, but still, most of the morning will have a fog element involved that should help limit the player's vision, keep things in even a little tighter, even a little more menacing, a lot of shadows moving around. Most of the villagers at this point are going to be hiding in their homes or fleeing to the inn of the chapel. They're going to be hiding in different places. Some of them might be out trying to reach the inn or the chapel. Your PCs are going to be presumably hunting the ghast through the village. He moves very quickly, and as that fog spreads, it's going to be a lot harder to see him. Plus, we now have Silas actively moving through the village, and once he catches scent or sight of the PCs, he's going to begin to stalk them, looking for chances to cause them trouble. If he sees one of the PCs off away from the others, he will try to go for them. So you're going to need to kind of track on your map where these two threats are, and keep track of how the PCs are dealing with them. This scene, this initial kind of chaos trying to track down the were-rat and the ghast is going to account for some time. It could take a while. The ghast will constantly try to escape from the PCs, and because he's fast, he should be able to get away a couple times at least. It's going to require your PCs to corner him somehow to try to get him stuck in a position. In between his escapes from the PCs, he'll be busting into houses, trying to kill people. He might bust into, pig pens, chicken coops, farmyards, things like that. He might grab a stray dog or a dog that's chained outside of a house. Anything that he kills is going to come back as a zombie within not too long. It won't be instant, but it'll be a while after he's killed it. And so you're going to have then those zombies moving throughout the village if it takes long enough to catch him. Once the PCs do actually catch him, in the module we suggest that while the battle's going on, Theta should show up. She's tracked it by the sound or just happened to luck into finding them, and she'll be screaming for them not to hurt Father Chandley. Acolyte Theta, no matter what she's looking at in terms of the Ghast, she only sees Father Chandley. So if that should help complicate the PC's ability to deal with Father Chandley. She may even try to knock one of them off of him if they seem to be hurting him, something like that. She isn't going to harm the PCs or in any way, take any violent actions toward the PCs, but, well, violent enough if she thinks she's saving Father Chandley. She's not going to try to actively hurt the PCs, but she is going to actively try to stop them from hurting Father Chandley. And if she thinks they are, she just absolutely will have none of that, right? Because she thinks the demons can be exorcised from him, which they can't. But that should just add to the kind of tense overlay of that. One way or another, eventually the Father Chandley problem should probably be taken care of. And Silas, the were-rat, may or may not also get taken care of. This could take the entire day in the village if they just keep escaping from the PCs. It could take an awfully long time to resolve the entire problem. And this problem should be complicated by the fact that about every 4 to 5 hours that go by, you're going to want to roll to see what kind of undead come wandering down the creek from the north. So the Thornwall, even though it surrounded the entire village, it hasn't grown in the creek. It's grown over the creek, sort of made a little, like a tunnel ceiling above the creek. It's because the creek cuts down into the ground. It's not instantly clear that this has happened. If players get close enough to the Thornwall and the creek, sort of on the edge, they'll see this kind of cave entrance over the creek. And once they're down in the creek, they can see that they got about 10 feet of headroom once they're in the creek. But it's a little bit tougher to see from the hills to either side of the creek. So that's the method. If they've looked at the map in the private dining room of the inn, they'll know that the Cutter Creek flows from the village up, winds its way through the hills, and goes right past the bottom of the hill, that is Bone Dust Hill, where the shrine is. So in other words, there's still a path out of the village to the shrine. It just happens to be along the path of the creek where the thorns have grown over it in a kind of a tunnel. This is a complicated way to travel if you've ever walked up a creek at all. I mean, it means that feet are going to get sore on the slippery rocks. It's combat in that creek is going to be a little more hard. And it's not so easy to kind of hide. You can't run off of, out of the creek and into the thorns. Well, maybe you could a little bit if you cut your way in. Gnome characters or any really small characters races that you have in your party, a gnome can move through the thorns fairly easy. Even for them, it's a little tricky, but they at least can move into the thorns. Halflings, they're a little too big already to get through. Dwarves, no-go. Humans, anything medium-sized, they're not going to be able to make it through. But small things, they can go into it pretty easy. So a gnome should be able to squeeze into those thorn walls and travel through them at a slow and careful pace, but they can do it. But that's about it. I mean, unless your party is made up of gnomes, the path through the thorn wall is pretty much limited to the creek once the thing has come about. But a lot of the action is going to be taking place in the village, and you're going to have these incursions happening like every 4 or 5 hours. You're going to roll on this chart and see whether some skeletons, zombies, thorn blights, not sure what else comes down the creek, but it can be a substantial number. You can end up with quite a few skeletons coming in. Now, we made the numbers reasonable, and frankly, I think we made them a little too reasonable. If I was DMing this, I would double the amount of whatever I rolled on the incursions chart just to add a lot more spice. As the skeletons or zombies come into the village, they're going to spread out and just start working their way through the village, hunting for living people. So there's plenty of opportunities for the party to have combat and action inside of the village itself to save people or animals. Remember that if there's zombies that come into the village, anyone they kill and if there's a bunch of zombies and they surround a villager and drag them down and eat them, that villager will rise as a skeleton. But if they just sort of kill a few people and move on, if you have it that way, those people will rise again as zombies. And it should be the same for all the livestock as well. So cows, horses, mules, sheep, pigs, anything that gets entirely devoured or partially devoured by the zombies, they're going to rise as undead themselves within a little while, and they will also be hungry, and they will also be hunting. So it's not like you're going to have a placid cow zombie. You're going to have a cow zombie that's trying to batter its way probably pretty effectively into a house or into another field, or chasing around, a living dog or something like that it's trying to eat. So lots of opportunity for entertaining combat to take place in there. And as DM, you really kind of got to decide how long you would like this shit show to proceed. It can go on for, now in the module, we say, look, if your party hasn't reached the tomb by the third day or so, chances are Altheron will have already gained the body that he's after in the tomb and escaped the tomb. You can play with that. That it doesn't have to be strictly, 3-day limit. You can make it a 4 or a 5-day limit, or no limit if you'd like it. Now, Altheron has gotten into the tomb by the point all this is going on. He's been working his way through the tomb for a day or two, and he has found the secret entrance to where the tomb is specifically that he's looking for. But he hasn't quite made it into that tomb yet, so he could be delayed there. He could be delayed there for, however long you like. If you're sticking to just kind of the, reasonable, how long you could suspend disbelief on the concept of this, fairly powerful necromancer not being able to figure out the secret entrance, 3 days is reasonable, I think, from the point that the Thornwall shows up. But you can stretch it a little. Depends on how much fun you're having with the PCs just desperately trying to save the villagers. That can go on, I would say at least go on for a day. You're going to have at least 1 day in there, maybe 2. Now, what hinges on this ending, this particular section of the adventure ending, is really how long it takes the PCs to determine that there is a tomb and that they need to go into it to probably get to the source of all this trouble that's, landing in Dawn's Hollow. The fact that there's a tomb and that it's not being discussed by the acolytes means that most of the people in the village don't know there's a tomb. They just know there's a shrine out there. The acolytes all know that there is a tomb out there, but they won't talk about it just out of habit, so the PCs kind of have to start to get an inkling that there's something different going on out at the battlefield, and once, maybe they can finally drag it out of one of the acolytes. If they have the book called The Heroes of Bone Dust Hill, which is in the library of the inn, and they've been reading through that, and you've been handing out the synopses of those chapters, then they should be able to surmise from that there's a tomb under the old battlefield, under the shrine, the old battlefield. The fact that there's a secret to entering it, though, that may or may not come up, and so you're going to need to find a place where that information can be given. What you probably don't want to have happen is your PCs to eventually figure out, oh my god, there's a tomb out there, that's what's going on, we need to get out there, get into this tomb, and then arrive at the tomb and not have any idea, not even an inkling how to open that tomb. That can happen, in which case you may have to finagle some way for them to figure it out. The secret is that they can only open the tomb at sunrise, and they have to lay their hand on sort of this steel plate on the stones on the base of the shrine there. The steel plate is described. Once they arrive at the shrine, they'll see it. But it will only open during sunrise, while the shadow of sunrise has taken, the shadow of the stone over the shrine is ringed by 5 stones. The biggest one is set due east. When the sun is rising behind it, its shadow lays over this steel plate, and it's in the hour or two that shadow is there that the PCs can put their hand down, touch the plate, and open the tomb to gain entrance to it. Now, the acolytes will not give up that secret, and at a certain point on the first day, Theta should be killed. You should, work your scenes, have everything going on until the point where maybe the PCs go back to the inn to take a break or to eat or something to just, they're trying to reconvene, talk to people, figure things out. One of the acolytes should come into the inn at that time and be like, desperately, come quick, Theta's been hurt. And, if once they go back, they'll find that Theta went out in the village looking for more villagers, was hurt by undead, and she died in the lap of Niles. But just before she dies, she gives Niles the secret. Now, you finagle this however you have to. We describe a couple of ways for that to happen, a couple of different alternative ways for her death to play out. It could be that Silas kills her, the were-rat might get her, something like that. One way or another, though, she should manage to crawl or, get back to the inn, maybe, or not the inn, the chapel. Maybe Silas kills her in the chapel, something. Silas escapes, or even Father Chandley, if he's still alive, he escapes. Maybe she captured Father Chandley or thought she had captured him, or, went looking for him and was, trying to talk sweetly to him and he attacked her or something. One way or another, she gets mortally wounded. She arrives back with Niles and delivers this information to Niles just before she dies. The Acolytes are pretty low level. They don't have a way to raise her from the dead, and you want her to die before the PCs arrive so that nobody can come over and, shove a healing potion down her throat or try to stop her bleeding or anything like that. Have Theta die. If that just can't be conveniently contrived, then you may want to have... you're going to end up in a situation where you want the PCs to have to take one of these Acolytes with them. Hopefully Niles, because he's the most trouble. He's a coward, and it will be the most entertaining thing for you as a DM to be able to get to run this coward Niles, especially if you have the evil PCs. But it could be Theta. Theta could go with them. She's entertaining too, only because she's so in charge of whatever she's doing. So she will constantly be vying to give orders and tell people what to do, and she's not ever going to be very nice about it, and she's going to expect to be obeyed instantly. So that may or may not work for you pretty well too. It's up to you how you play that out. When it comes to Silas and hunting him in the village, remember that Silas spends a great deal of his time as a giant rat and that he hides in the outhouses. So eventually, if your PCs can manage to track him somehow, they're going to end up tracking him to these outhouses, and he's going to have dropped down into the muck under the outhouse to hide. And this is probably going to elicit a situation where the PCs have to start poking around down in there somehow, maybe with long sticks or something, trying to reach down into the muck in the bowl. What would you call it? A bowl? The receptacle of the outhouses? Whatever it is, eventually they may end up having to go down into that muck themselves to try to sort out Silas. That's why it's important to make note of these outhouses and point them out. Also, if there's enough undead, stuff gets hairy enough, down in those outhouses might be a good place to hide for some of the PCs. Remember that the root systems of the trees down by the creek also grow out over the creek, so there's good hiding. Well, relatively good hiding places there, at least a shield. If worse comes to worse, a PC could crawl in the creek and up against the embankment and have some roots between themselves and a bunch of undead that they, can, if they've got a sword, maybe they can stab that out between the roots and try to fight from there, something like that. It's totally up to you how long you play that out, how long it takes them to get in control of the situation, to capture or kill Silas, capture and kill the Ghast. Now, if they capture the Ghast and they take it back to the chapel, that's a good opportunity for the Ghast to kill Theta, because it's going to take her, a couple hours to do her exorcism. She's going to demand that the Ghast be tied to a pillar and everyone leave her alone with it to perform this rite. And while that's going on, of course, the Ghast is going to escape or something and kill her. Niles will hear the screams and arrive as the Ghast is jumping out the back window and, run over to Theta, hold her head, and she will tell him the secret of how to enter the tomb. So you end up with, again, Niles knowing the secret. And being unable to tell the secret, he'll have to go along, unless the PCs can figure it out themselves. Awful lot of sunrise symbology going on around the chapel. So if the PCs see enough of that, they may eventually figure it out and not have to take one of the Acolytes if they don't want to. But as DM, you're kind of going to want them to take Niles once they do decide to go. Now, if they do decide that they have to head to the tomb and that they're going to have to drag Niles along with them, Niles or Theta, either one of them, will demand that they leave at middle night, basically midnight, but there are no clocks here. So, middle night, the middle of the night, they'll leave to go to this place, and that's the only time they'll do it. It'll seem a little odd, especially for Niles, who is a coward, but ideally see Niles will set that time because that's the only way to ensure that they will arrive at the shrine around sunrise, so that because he's trying to avoid camping at the shrine. Now, once they do arrive, if that happens, and they arrive out at the shrine and they make it to the top of the shrine by, around sunrise, then Niles will open the tomb, but then pretty swiftly realize that he's going to have to go make it all the way back to the village by himself down the creek, which he isn't going to want to do, so he'll probably stay with the PCs anyway, just to have protection in numbers, although he really doesn't want to go into the tomb and it will be terrified of it. It's pretty much same situation for Theta, though she'll want to go into the tomb to make sure that the PCs don't rob it or, desecrate it, do anything to it that she doesn't want them to do. If you have an evil PC party, this is going to create a tense situation because I'm not sure how long they might put up with that. It might not be very long at all once that tomb has been opened. So these are just all little factors you're going to have to kind of juggle in order to keep things moving toward the shrine. So I think that pretty much covers almost everything there is to know about that second day and leading up to when the PCs finally leave the village. Like I said, this session, or not this session, but this section of our module is kind of up to you to play out how you'd like. We have incursions of undead coming down that creek at a pretty regular rate. PCs having to fight them off and save the villagers. You can mix and play with that as much as you like. Your maps of the village are going to be important here. The fact that, it's foggy for a while. You can even have more fog come up in the morning if you like that, or have the fog from the bottle just magically linger around for a long time so that it stays thick and soupy in here and it's hard to see, and it just adds to the tension and kind of the dark atmosphere of the whole situation. You can play with this in a million ways because it's, an undead incursion or multiple undead incursions, and the PC's just going to have to battle their way through this trying to save the village until they realize that they need to get down in that tomb, at which point they'll have to leave and head up north along that same creek that the undead keep coming down. So once they do that, you can stop tracking the incursions specifically because we have a set of 4, I think, set encounters along the course of the creek, and then there's the paths in through the thorns that are that Altheron left cleared for himself and his undead to move around the battlefield, and your PCs will have to take and navigate their way through those up to the top of the shrine on the battlefield hill. But until then, until they arrive out there at that shrine, they're not really going to know whether they have to cut their way through the thorns to reach the top or whatever. And there's going to be more undead at the battlefield hill, specifically near the entrances that get out of the creek into the paths through the thorns. Going to be quite a few of them there, so a lot of opportunities for combat. You're going to want to probably use minion rules in these situations, try to minimize the hit points of their foes, allow the PCs more cinematic kills and quicker kills so that your action moves along at a pretty good click. But how long it takes you to get them from the village to that hill comes down to how long it takes your PCs to figure out they need to enter the tomb, whether or not you have to just make that bluntly clear to them or whether they can figure it out on their own, and how much fun you're having in the village and how these incursions are working out and how the people that are killed raising as undead is working out. All of that's a lot to play with and a lot to work with. Plus you've got they're going to have to capture, maybe interrogate Silas. He has a lot to say if they can capture him. If they kill Silas, P.S., by the way, Silas is he's a minion of Orcus. That means that within 4-6 hours after his physical form's death, he will rise as an undead. And when he does, he's going to rise in the form of the monster, hybrid were-rat. He's not going to rise as just scraggly little Silas or the giant rat. He's going to rise as the full beast. Only now he's going to be also a zombie, or possibly even like a wraith, which would be a terrible thing to have to face. And so you have that to play with too. All of that to kind of add into the flavor of what's going on. If the PCs leave the village out toward the shrine without having taken care of Silas, then he's going to get Mindra and they're going to follow the PCs up the creek. And he's going to wait until they become engaged in a situation that's, particularly dangerous to them, and then he's going to attack them. He won't just dive into the middle of the PCs somewhere along the creek. He's going to wait for about the most opportune moment to launch his attack. So you have that to play with too. And okay, I think that pretty much covers the Undead Incursion days from the second morning in the village of Dawn's Hollow up until your PCs have determined that they need to make their way out to the tomb. And you have a lot to juggle and play with there, and you can stretch that out or condense it however you like, whatever fits your game the best, and hopefully you spend some time messing with it, because I think it's a really good chance to set up a great tense situation Your PCs get to plan and try to, defend certain areas, maybe build defenses, negotiate their way into the tower or something like that, and then just keep rolling with your incursions. How long is it going to take before the skeletons and zombies start climbing up the sides of that tower? How long is it going to take for them to bust into the inn or the chapel? What buildings get burned down in the course of this? How long before people start running out of firewood? I don't know. There's all sorts of stuff that's going to be going on there. So I hope you play that up as much as possible and have some fun with it. And let us know what you did. In the meantime, I will be back for Session 6, where we will talk about the trek up the creek toward the battlefield. We'll talk about the battlefield. And I think that's about all we'll cover in Session 6. And maybe we'll go over the preliminaries of what to expect in the tomb. And then hopefully Session 7 will get us delving into the tomb itself.
Hey everyone, Ashiel here, and if you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/madhermitgames. In addition to our free walkthrough podcasts, we will be offering subscriptions which will include new dungeons, storylines, NPCs, as well as other exclusive content on a monthly basis. We look forward to hearing from you, so please consider joining our Discord channel, Mad Hermit Games, where you can connect with us, other DMs, and players. You can also email us at madhermitgames@mail.com, and all the links will be in the description. Thanks for listening.